The Alaskan wilderness stretched endlessly beyond Marcus Kane's remote cabin, where temperatures had plummeted to -30 degrees for the third straight day. His two German shepherds, Thor and Odin, had been restless all morning, whining at the door with an urgency he'd never seen before. As a former Navy SEAL turned wilderness rescue specialist, Marcus trusted his dog's instincts more than his own. When he finally released them into the blizzard, they bolted toward the frozen lake with purpose. What he found there defied explanation. A woman, barely breathing, curled in the snow, wearing nothing but a hospital gown. But instead of attacking or simply alerting him, Thor and Odin had formed a protective circle around her, their body heat keeping her alive. As Marcus carried her unconscious form back to his cabin, he noticed the surgical scars, the faded tattoos that looked military, and most disturbing of all, the fresh needle marks on her arms. This wasn't just a lost hiker. The dogs had saved someone dangerous, someone running from something worse than death itself. But what had she done to deserve being left to die in the middle of nowhere? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus kicked open his cabin door, the woman's weight surprisingly slight in his arms. Her skin was ice-cold, lips blue with hypothermia, but she was breathing. Shallow, rapid breaths that told him time was critical. He'd seen enough death to know when someone was dancing on its edge. The interior of his cabin was sparse but functional. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, already blazing from when he'd stoked it before checking on the dogs. Medical supplies lined a shelf near his kitchen, a habit from his military days that had served him well in his new life as a wilderness rescue specialist. He laid her on the thick wool blankets covering his couch, then immediately began cutting away the hospital gown with scissors from his field kit. Hypothermia protocols flooded back from his SEAL training, gradual warming, monitor vitals, prevent shock. But as more of her skin became visible, more questions arose. The tattoos weren't random. A series of numbers below her left collarbone, coordinates maybe, a small anchor behind her right ear nearly faded. Most telling was the scarred over ink on her forearm where something had been deliberately removed with what looked like a blade. Someone had wanted to erase part of her identity. The surgical scars were fresh, maybe 2 weeks old. A long incision along her abdomen, precise and clean, not from trauma but from something planned. The needle marks on her arms showed a pattern, not the chaotic punctures of an addict, but the methodical marks of repeated medical procedures. Marcus wrapped her in heated blankets and checked her pulse, weak but steady. He started an 4-drip from his medical supplies, pushing warmed saline to help raise her core temperature. His hands moved automatically through the life-saving procedures, but his mind raced. In 5 years of living in this remote corner of Alaska, he'd never seen another human being within 50 miles of his cabin. The nearest road was a 3-hour hike through dangerous terrain. No one ended up here by accident, especially not in a hospital gown during the worst blizzard of the season. Thor and Odin sat at attention near the couch, their dark eyes fixed on the woman. Their behavior still puzzled him. They were trained protection dogs, bred and conditioned to be wary of strangers. Yet they'd not only refused to see her as a threat, they'd actively worked to save her life. Marcus had learned to trust his dog's judgment above all else. During his military service, working dogs had saved his unit countless times by detecting threats human senses missed. If Thor and Odin saw something in this woman worth protecting, there had to be a reason. He built up the fire and settled into the chair across from the couch, his service pistol within easy reach. The smart play would be to call for medical evacuation, get her to a hospital where she belonged. But the satellite phone meant involving authorities, and something told him this woman was running from exactly that kind of attention. The wind howled outside, rattling the cabin's reinforced windows. The storm would last at least another day, maybe 2. Even if he wanted to move her, it wasn't possible. They were trapped together until the weather cleared. As if sensing his thoughts, the woman stirred slightly. Her eyelids fluttered, and she mumbled something incomprehensible. Marcus leaned forward, straining to catch the words, but she slipped back into unconsciousness. On the table beside her, he noticed something he'd missed before, a small piece of paper tucked into the waistband of the hospital gown. Carefully, he extracted it. A phone number was scrawled in shaky handwriting, along with 2 words that made his blood run cold: trust no one. Marcus stared at the note, feeling the familiar weight of dread he'd hoped never to experience again. Whatever this woman was running from had followed her into his sanctuary, bringing with it the kind of danger he'd spent 5 years trying to escape. The woman's pulse fluttered beneath Marcus's fingertips like a dying bird. Her lips had taken on a bluish tinge that sent ice through his veins. Hypothermia was claiming her faster than he'd calculated. The dogs circled restlessly, their earlier aggression replaced by something he'd never seen before: fear. "Easy, girl," he murmured to Sasha, who kept backing away from the stretcher every time the woman stirred. The German shepherd's hackles remained raised, a low whine escaping her throat. In 5 years of search and rescue, Marcus had never seen his lead dog react like this to a victim. The cabin materialized through the swirling snow just as the woman's breathing became dangerously shallow. Marcus kicked open the door, hauling the stretcher inside with practiced efficiency. The warmth hit him like a wall, but the woman didn't respond to the temperature change, never a good sign. He transferred her to the couch near the wood stove, his hands moving through the familiar rhythm of emergency care. Strip away wet clothing, check for injuries, warm core temperature gradually. But as he peeled away her jacket, something crinkled in the inner pocket. A passport, Russian. The photo showed the same ethereal features, but the name made his blood run cold: Yelena Volkov. The surname hit him like a punch to the gut. Volkov. He'd heard that name whispered in the dark corners of classified briefings, seen it stamped on files he wasn't supposed to remember. Files connected to operations that had gone sideways in ways that still woke him up screaming. Marcus forced himself to keep working. Whatever ghosts this woman carried, she was dying now, and his oath to preserve life superseded everything else. He wrapped her in heated blankets, started an 4 with supplies from his extensive medical kit, and monitored her vitals as her body slowly responded to treatment. But the dogs wouldn't settle. Rex paced by the windows, periodically letting out sharp barks at sounds only he could hear. Sasha had retreated to the far corner, watching the woman with intelligent brown eyes that seemed to see something Marcus couldn't. The woman's eyes fluttered open near midnight. They were the pale green of glacial ice, and when they focused on Marcus, he saw something that made every instinct he'd honed in 2 decades of warfare scream warnings: intelligence, calculation, and underneath it all, a bone-deep terror that mirrored his own. "You're safe," he said automatically, the lie tasting bitter on his tongue. Nothing about this situation felt safe. She tried to sit up, winced, and fell back against the pillows. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, heavily accented. "How long?" "6 hours. You were hypothermic, severe dehydration. What were you doing out there?" Her laugh was hollow, bitter, running. She studied his face with those unsettling eyes. "You are military, special operations." It wasn't a question. Marcus kept his expression neutral, but internally alarms were sounding. Civilians didn't identify operators that easily, not unless they'd been trained to spot them. "I'm retired," he said carefully. "No such thing." She struggled to prop herself up on one elbow. "I know who you are, Marcus Chen. Delta Force, Team 7, Operation Nightfall, Kandahar Province, 2019. The room went dead silent, except for the crackling of the fire. Operation Nightfall was classified beyond black, a mission that officially never happened, involving the elimination of a weapons dealer who'd been selling advanced Russian tech to insurgents. The kind of mission that left no survivors to tell tales, except apparently it had. Marcus's hand moved instinctively toward the Glock, holstered beneath his flannel shirt. "Who are you?" "Someone who should have died with the rest of my family that night." Her voice carried the weight of old grief, but her eyes remained sharp, watching his every micro-expression. But perhaps we can help each other now. The wind outside picked up, rattling the cabin's windows. Rex's barking became more agitated, and through the storm, Marcus thought he heard something that made his throat tighten. The distant whine of snowmobile engines. "You led them here," he said, the realization hitting him like cold water. "Not led. But they will find me eventually. They always do." She sat up fully now, ignoring the foreline that pulled taut. "The question is whether you will help me disappear permanently, or whether you will die with me when they arrive." Marcus moved to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. Headlights bobbed through the trees, still distant but closing fast. 3 of them, maybe 4, professional spacing. They weren't locals lost in the storm. The engines grew louder. 15 minutes, Yelena said softly. "Maybe 20 in this weather. Choose quickly, Marcus Chen. Some demons never let you rest." The woman's breathing had steadied by the time Marcus finished cleaning her wounds, but her fever spiked as the night deepened. He'd moved her to his bed, the warmest room in the cabin, while he kept vigil from a chair beside her. The dogs hadn't left their posts either. Bear stretched across the threshold like a furry sentinel, while Scout maintained her protective circle around the bed's perimeter. Every few minutes, the woman would mutter something in what sounded like Russian, her hands clenching the blankets as if fighting invisible enemies. Marcus found himself leaning closer each time, trying to catch fragments that might explain how she'd ended up half dead in his wilderness. The rational part of his mind warned him that getting involved was dangerous, that he should call for medical evacuation at first light and wash his hands of whatever trouble she represented. But something about her reminded him of himself in those dark months after Kandahar, broken, running, desperate for someone to throw him a lifeline without asking too many questions. Around 3 in the morning, her fever broke. Marcus was dozing fitfully when her voice, clear and accented, cut through the silence. "Where am I?" He opened his eyes to find her staring at him, those striking green eyes now sharp and alert. Despite her obvious weakness, he could see the wariness there, the way she catalogued every detail of the room without moving her head. "Safe," Marcus said simply. "My cabin, about 40 miles north of Fairbanks." She processed this information with the calculating look of someone accustomed to measuring distances and escape routes. "How long?" "I found you yesterday afternoon. You've been unconscious for about 14 hours. He leaned forward slightly. "What's your name?" The pause lasted too long. "Anna," she said finally, and he knew immediately it was a lie. "Okay, Anna. I'm Marcus. Those are my dogs, Bear and Scout. They found you." He gestured to the animals, who had both lifted their heads at the sound of voices. "You want to tell me how you ended up dying of exposure in the middle of nowhere?" Another calculating pause. "I was hiking, got lost." The lies were smooth, practiced, but Marcus had interrogated enough prisoners to recognize the signs. The slight tension around her eyes, the way her fingers moved almost imperceptibly as if she were keeping track of the story she was building. In designer boots, with no survival gear, he kept his voice neutral, non-threatening. "And no vehicle within a 50-mile radius of where I found you?" She studied his face for a long moment, and he could almost see her mind working, weighing options. "You were military," she said finally. It wasn't a question. "Navy. You?" "Spetsnaz, former." The admission seemed to cost her something. "Russian Special Forces." That explained the calculated wariness, the way she'd assessed the room. It also raised about a dozen red flags that Marcus chose to ignore for the moment. "What happened out there?" he asked again, gentler this time. "People were hunting me." Her accent thickened with exhaustion. "I ran as far as I could, then—" She gestured weakly at herself. "What people?" She closed her eyes. "The kind who don't give up." Marcus felt a familiar chill that had nothing to do with the Alaskan winter. He'd spent enough years in the shadow world to recognize when someone was running from the kind of trouble that killed bystanders as readily as targets. "Are they still out there?" "Probably." She opened her eyes again, meeting his gaze directly. "I should go. You've done enough." She tried to sit up, and immediately went pale, swaying dangerously. Marcus steadied her with one hand, while Scout whined softly from her position beside the bed. "You're not going anywhere for at least a few days," he said firmly. "Besides, there's a storm coming in. Weather Service is calling for 3 feet of snow and whiteout conditions. You don't understand." "I understand plenty." Marcus's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions. "I understand you're running scared from people who want you dead. I understand you're trained to handle yourself, but you're currently too weak to stand up without help. And I understand that whatever you're mixed up in, dying of exposure in my backyard isn't going to solve it." She stared at him for a long moment, and he could see her reassessing him just as thoroughly as she'd catalogued the room. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why what? Why help me? You know I'm trouble." Marcus glanced at Bear, who had moved closer to the bed, drawn by some instinct that seemed to recognize kindred damage. "Maybe I know what it's like to need help when the world's trying to kill you." Something shifted in her expression, surprise maybe, or recognition. She settled back against the pillows, still watching him with those calculating eyes. 3 days, she said. "When the storm passes, I go. We'll see." The woman's eyes snapped open as Marcus cleaned the wound on her shoulder, her pupils dilating in the lamplight. For a moment she stared at him with the sharp awareness of someone calculating escape routes and threat levels, an expression he recognized all too well from his own mirror. "Easy," he said, keeping his voice low and steady. "You're safe. My name's Marcus." She tried to sit up, winced, and fell back against the pillows he'd arranged on his couch. Her gaze darted around the cabin, taking in every detail with methodical precision. When she spotted his rifles mounted on the far wall, something shifted in her expression. Not fear, but assessment. "Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse, accent faintly European, but carefully neutral. "My cabin, about 40 miles northwest of Anchorage." Marcus set down the antiseptic and reached for the bandages. "You were hypothermic when my dogs found you. That was 6 hours ago. Your dogs." She glanced toward Bear and Scout, who hadn't moved from their posts by the door. "They're unusual." Marcus paused in his work. Most people commented on the dog's size or their obvious intelligence. No one had ever called them unusual in quite that tone, as if she understood something about them that others missed. "They're good at finding people who need help." He secured the bandage over her shoulder wound. "Speaking of which, you want to tell me how you ended up bleeding in a blizzard wearing summer clothes?" The silence stretched between them. Outside, wind rattled the windows, and the generator hummed its steady rhythm. She was studying his hands as he worked, noting the scars across his knuckles, the steadiness that came from field medical training, the calluses from weapons handling. "I got lost," she said finally. "Uh-huh." Marcus didn't look up from checking her pulse, still elevated, but stronger than before. "And the bullet wound." Another silence. When he met her eyes, he saw the exact moment she realized he wasn't going to accept easy lies. "Hunting accident," she said. "Hunting accident that left powder burns on your jacket and an entry wound angled like someone was shooting down at you from close range?" Marcus sat back on his heels. "Lady, I've seen enough gunshot wounds to know the difference between an accident and someone trying to put you down." She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, the calculation was back, but underneath it he glimpsed something else. Exhaustion that went deeper than physical fatigue. "You're military," she said. It wasn't a question. Was. Navy. Special operations. Again, not a question. She was reading him as easily as he was reading her. Marcus stood and walked to the kitchen, giving himself distance while he processed. The woman was trained, that much was obvious. Her situational awareness, the way she'd catalogued his weapons and escape routes, even how she'd tried to deflect his questions while gathering information about him. But there was something else, something that made Bear and Scout react like they had. He returned with a mug of broth and handed it to her. "Drink this. You need the electrolytes." She accepted the mug but didn't drink immediately. "Thank you for helping me." "Don't thank me yet." Marcus settled into the chair across from her. Because here's the thing, I live out here specifically to avoid complications, and you, whoever you are, feel like a very big complication. Then why help me at all? The question caught him off guard. He thought about Bear's insistence, the way Scout had positioned himself between her and the door, not like a guard, but like a protector, about the scars he'd seen when he'd cut away her clothes, old marks that told a story of someone who'd survived things that should have killed her. Because sometimes you don't get a choice, he said finally. She took a tentative sip of the broth, and some of the tension left her shoulders. I can pay you. For the medical care. For your trouble. I don't want your money. Then what do you want? The truth would be a good start. Marcus leaned forward. Real name, not whatever identity you're running under. Who shot you and why? And what kind of trouble is heading toward my door because I decided to play Good Samaritan? Outside, one of the motion sensors on his perimeter triggered, sending a soft chime through the cabin's security system. Probably just a caribou, but both dogs lifted their heads, ears forward. The woman noticed their reaction and tensed. How good is your security system? She asked quietly. The casual way she asked, like someone familiar with such considerations, sent ice through Marcus's veins. Good enough. Why? She set down the mug and tried to push herself upright, her face going pale with the effort. Because if they tracked me here, we need to leave. Now. Who tracked you? Before she could answer, Bear's low growl filled the cabin, and Marcus heard the distant sound of helicopter rotors cutting through the storm. The woman's eyes fluttered open just as Marcus finished checking her pulse for the third time in an hour. Her pupils dilated as they focused on his face, and he watched something shift behind them, a calculation, swift and instinctive, that told him she was cataloguing exits even while barely conscious. Easy, he said, keeping his voice low and steady. You're safe. She tried to sit up, winced, and fell back against the makeshift pillow he'd fashioned from his jacket. Where? The word came out as a rasp. My cabin, about 15 miles southeast of where I found you. Marcus kept his hands visible, palms open. He'd seen that look before, in the eyes of soldiers pulled from enemy territory. What's your name? Her mouth opened, then closed. He could practically see her mind working, deciding what truth to offer. Sarah, she finally said. A hesitation told him it was a lie, but he nodded anyway. Sarah, I'm Marcus. You've been unconscious for about 6 hours. How do you feel? Like I fell off a mountain. She attempted a weak smile that didn't reach her eyes. Close. More like you were running through a blizzard in nothing but jeans and a sweater. He leaned forward slightly. What were you running from? The question hung in the air between them. Outside, Zeus whined softly, and Marcus realized the dog hadn't left his post by the door since they'd returned. Both animals had been acting strange all afternoon, alert in a way that went beyond their usual vigilance. I don't remember, Sarah said, but her fingers found the edge of the blanket and gripped it tightly. I was hiking, I think. Got turned around in the storm. Marcus had spent enough time interrogating prisoners to recognize deflection. Hiking, in October, in designer jeans and sneakers. He let that sink in. No gear, no supplies, no emergency beacon. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I'm not very experienced. No, he agreed. But you are lying. The words came out harder than he'd intended, and he saw her flinch. For a moment, vulnerability flickered across her features. Genuine fear that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with whatever had driven her into that wilderness. Atlas suddenly lifted his head from where he'd been lying by the fireplace, ears pricked forward. A low growl rumbled in his chest, so quiet Marcus almost missed it. Both dogs were now facing the same direction, toward the front of the cabin. What is it? Sarah's voice carried a note of panic that confirmed his suspicions. Marcus held up a hand for silence, moving quietly to the window. The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows through the trees. He scanned the tree line methodically, looking for movement, listening for the subtle sounds that didn't belong. His hand found the Glock holstered beneath his jacket. Muscle memory from years when hesitation meant death. "Expecting company?" he asked, without turning around. "No." But her voice trembled on the word. Zeus's whine grew more insistent. The dog's training had saved Marcus's life more than once in Afghanistan, and he'd learned to trust those instincts absolutely. Something was wrong. Something was coming. "Sarah, or whatever your real name is, I need you to tell me what kind of trouble you're in. Right now." She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "The kind that gets people killed." Marcus felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the hyper-awareness that came with imminent danger. He'd moved to Alaska specifically to avoid this feeling, to escape the constant calculation of threats and responses. But here it was anyway, brought to his doorstep by a woman with frightened eyes and too many secrets. "How many?" he asked. "I don't know. Maybe 3, maybe more." She struggled to sit up again, this time managing to prop herself against the wall. "You should leave. Just go, and pretend you never found me." Not happening. Marcus moved away from the window, checking the locks on the door. His cabin had been designed with security in mind, reinforced walls, multiple exits, clear sight lines, but it wasn't a fortress. "These people looking for you, what do they want?" "Something I took from them." "What?" Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her jacket pocket, then stopped. Information, evidence, proof of things that certain people would kill to keep hidden. Atlas's growl grew louder, and Marcus saw movement through the trees, a flash of dark clothing against the snow. His pulse quickened, adrenaline flooding his system as training took over. He'd sworn he was done with this life, done with violence and death, and the weight of other people's secrets. But sometimes, the past didn't care what you'd sworn. Sarah nodded, though her face was pale with pain. "Then we're leaving. Now." The woman's breathing had steadied during the night, but Jake knew better than to trust appearances. He'd seen too many soldiers rally before the end, their bodies summoning one last surge of strength before giving up entirely. As dawn broke through the cabin's frost-covered windows, he checked her pulse again, weak but consistent. Bear and Kodiak flanked her makeshift bed, their vigil unbroken. Even when Jake had gotten up twice to stoke the fire, they'd barely acknowledged him. Their attention remained fixed on the stranger, ears pricked at every subtle change in her breathing pattern. "What is it about her?" he murmured, scratching behind Kodiak's ears. The dog leaned into his touch but didn't look away from the woman. Jake prepared another dose of antibiotics, grateful he kept a well-stocked medical kit. Living this far from civilization meant being prepared for anything. He'd stitched up his own wounds more times than he cared to count, set a broken wrist, and once removed a bullet fragment from his thigh using a hunting knife and a bottle of whiskey. But this was different. The woman's injuries weren't from a climbing accident or animal attack. The puncture wound in her shoulder was too precise, too clean. A knife wielded by someone who knew what they were doing. The defensive wounds on her forearms told a story of a fight, of someone desperately trying to survive. As he adjusted her bandages, she stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, and for a moment, Jake caught a glimpse of startling green eyes before they closed again. But in that brief instant, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Recognition, not of him, but of consciousness returning, of someone calculating their situation even while barely clinging to life. The radio crackled in the corner, and Jake moved to answer it. Tom's voice came through the static, tinged with concern. "Jake, you there? Been trying to reach you since yesterday." "I'm here, Tom. What's the situation with that search and rescue?" A pause. "That's what I'm calling about. Funny thing, nobody's reported anyone missing. State troopers, Park Service, even checked with the hotels and lodges. No outstanding missing persons that match what you described." Jake's grip tightened on the radio. "That's impossible. I've got an injured woman here who nearly died of exposure." "I believe you, but whoever she is, nobody's looking for her. At least, not officially." Tom's voice carried a weight that Jake recognized. the tone of someone who'd learned not to ask too many questions. "Weather's clearing, though. I could fly out there tomorrow if you need supplies or want to bring her to town." Jake glanced back at the woman. "Give me another day. She's not stable enough to move yet." After signing off, Jake found himself studying his unexpected guest more carefully. Her clothes, what remained of them, were high-quality outdoor gear. Not the kind of thing a casual hiker would wear. The boots were expensive, broken in but well-maintained. These were the belongings of someone who knew the wilderness, someone who'd planned to be out here. So why was nobody looking for her? He was checking her temperature when Bear suddenly lifted his head, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Both dogs had gone rigid, their attention focused on the door. Jake reached for the rifle mounted above the fireplace, his movements slow and deliberate. The dogs weren't showing their typical alertness to wildlife. This was something else, a tension Jake recognized from combat zones when the air itself seemed to thicken with unseen threats. Moving to the window, he peered through the small gap between the curtains. The snow-covered clearing appeared empty, but Jake had learned to trust his dog's instincts over his own eyes. Something was out there. Behind him, the woman made a sound, not quite a moan, but a wordless expression of distress. When Jake turned, her eyes were open, wide with panic as she tried to sit up. "Easy," Jake said, setting down the rifle and moving to her side. "You're safe. You're injured, but you're going to be okay." She stared at him for a long moment, those green eyes seeming to catalogue every detail of his face, the cabin, the dogs. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, raw from dehydration and cold. "They found me." "Who found you?" But she was already trying to get up, her face contorting with pain as she pushed against Jake's restraining hands. "Have to go. Not safe here, not safe for you." "Nobody's going anywhere," Jake said firmly. "You've got a serious infection and you nearly froze to death. Whatever you're running from—" "You don't understand." Her grip on his arm was surprisingly strong. "They'll kill you just for helping me. They'll kill anyone who—" Bear's growl intensified, and through the window, Jake caught a flash of movement in the tree line, a glint of metal that might have been a scope catching the morning light. The woman saw his expression change and closed her eyes. Too late. The storm hit harder than Jake had anticipated, turning the night into a wall of driving snow that made the windows rattle like machine gun fire. He'd seen worse weather in Alaska, but not with a dying woman in his cabin and the gnawing certainty that trouble was closing in from multiple directions. Elena had been unconscious for 6 hours now, her breathing shallow but steady. Doc Martinez had done what he could with the supplies Jake kept on hand, but they both knew she needed real medical attention. The nearest hospital was in Anchorage, a helicopter ride away on a good day. Tonight, nothing was flying. "Her vitals are stable," Martinez said, checking the makeshift four he'd rigged. "But Jake, there's something else. Those wounds on her back, they're not from any animal I know. They're precise, deliberate." Jake had suspected as much. The pattern was too clean, too methodical. Someone had worked her over with professional efficiency, the kind of efficiency he recognized from his own dark past. Kodiak whined from his position by the door, ears pricked toward the storm. The dog had been restless since Martinez arrived, alternating between watching Elena and monitoring the perimeter with an intensity that set Jake's nerves on edge. Bear lay closer to the fire, but his eyes never left the woman's face. "You need to tell me what you're really thinking, Doc." Martinez pulled off his glasses, cleaning them with deliberate slowness. "I'm thinking this woman isn't just lost, Jake. Someone wanted information from her. The cuts are shallow, designed to cause pain without hitting anything vital. Professional interrogation." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He'd seen similar work in places he tried not to remember, had been trained in techniques that lived in the same neighborhood. The Kandahar mission flashed through his mind, the compound, the screaming, the choices that still woke him up at night. "We need to call this in," Martinez continued. "State troopers, maybe federal—" "No." Jake's voice carried a finality that made both dogs look up. "Not yet. Jake, this is bigger than whatever off-the-grid lifestyle you've got going here. If she's running from people who do this kind of work, they won't stop because of a storm. Through the howling wind, Kodiak's whine shifted to something deeper. The dog moved to the window, hackles rising in a way that made Jake's combat instinct surge. Bear was on his feet instantly, positioning himself between Elena and the door. "Company," Jake muttered, moving to the gun safe with practiced speed. The Remington came out first, followed by his sidearm. Martinez watched with growing alarm as Jake's entire demeanor shifted into something harder, more dangerous. "How many people know you were coming here tonight?" "Just my wife." "Jake, what are you—" "Take her into the back bedroom. There's a rifle in the closet and a radio. Channel 7 will reach the ranger station if things go sideways." Kodiak's growl was barely audible under the storm, but Jake caught it. 2 years of working together had taught him to read the dog's alerts like a sixth sense. Whatever was out there wasn't wildlife. Martinez helped lift Elena's unconscious form, careful not to disturb the foreline. "This is insane, Jake. We should be trying to get her to a hospital, not playing soldier." "A hospital's not an option if we're dead." Jake moved to the main window, using the rifle scope to scan the tree line. The snow made visibility almost zero, but his dogs didn't need to see to know something was wrong. As Martinez disappeared into the back room with Elena, Jake felt the familiar weight of tactical decision-making settle over him. Perimeter, escape routes, defensive positions, the mental checklist ran automatically, muscle memory from a life he'd thought he'd left behind. The radio crackled to life on the kitchen counter. Jake had left it tuned to the emergency frequency, but the voice that came through wasn't from any rescue service. "We know she's there." The transmission was clear despite the storm, which meant they were close. "Send her out and we'll leave the rest of you alone." Bear moved to Jake's side, the dog's training evident in the way he stayed low and alert. Kodiak remained by the window, tracking something in the darkness that Jake couldn't see. Jake keyed the radio. "Wrong cabin, friend. Just me and my dogs riding out the storm." Jacob Morrison, retired SEAL Team 6, 2 Belgian Malinois named Kodiak and Bear. "You've been off the grid for 3 years, ever since the Kandahar incident forced your discharge." The voice carried casual confidence that made Jake's blood run cold. "We know exactly who you are and what you're capable of. This doesn't have to get messy." The storm seemed to pause for a moment, as if the wilderness itself was holding its breath. Jake's past and present were colliding with the force of an avalanche, and Elena, whoever she really was, sat at the center of it all. Outside, shadows moved between the trees, and Jake realized his carefully constructed isolation was about to become a battlefield. The storm hit just after midnight, turning the world outside into a howling wall of white. Marcus stood at the kitchen window, watching the wind bend the spruce trees nearly horizontal. The cabin creaked and groaned around them, but the logs held firm against nature's assault. Behind him, Sarah sat hunched over his laptop at the kitchen table, her fingers flying across the keys with desperate precision. She'd been at it for 3 hours straight, pausing only to sip the coffee he'd forced into her hands. The morphine had worn off, and he could see the pain etched in the tight lines around her eyes, but she refused his offer of more medication. "I need to think clearly," she'd said, and he understood that kind of stubbornness. Luna lay pressed against his legs, whimpering softly at each thunderous gust of wind. Bear had positioned himself between Sarah and the door, his massive head resting on his paws, but his ears constantly swiveling toward every sound. Even the dogs seemed to sense that something fundamental had shifted in their small world. "Marcus," Sarah's voice cut through the storm's noise. "You need to see this." He moved to look over her shoulder, catching the faint scent of the soap she'd used during her shower. On the screen was a news article dated 2 days ago. Federal prosecutor missing after whistleblower allegations. Sarah's face stared back at him from a professional headshot, the same face but different somehow. In the photo, her hair was shorter, styled. Her expression held a confidence that the broken woman at his table had lost somewhere in the wilderness. "Sarah Chen," he read aloud, "Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York." His eyes scanned the article quickly, disappeared after alleging corruption within the Department of Justice. Key witness in ongoing investigation into defense contractor fraud. Keep reading, she said quietly. The next paragraph made his blood run cold. Chen had been building a case against Blackwater Industries and several high-ranking Pentagon officials for fraudulent defense contracts, totaling over $2 billion. Sources indicate the conspiracy may involve active military personnel and could compromise ongoing operations in the Middle East. Marcus stepped back from the laptop as if it had burned him. Jesus Christ, Sarah, what have you gotten yourself into? She turned to face him, and in her eyes he saw the same haunted look he'd carried for years, the weight of knowing too much, of being marked by truths others would kill to keep buried. The same thing you did, I think, she said. The right thing at the wrong time. Before he could respond, Luna erupted into sharp barks. Bear was already on his feet, hackles raised, staring toward the front of the cabin. Through the storm's noise came another sound, the distant rumble of engines. That's impossible, Marcus muttered, moving to the window. Nothing can get through in this weather. But even as he said it, he could see lights cutting through the blizzard. Not headlights, something else, higher, moving with the deliberate pattern of aircraft. Helicopters, Sarah breathed, appearing beside him. They found me. Marcus's mind raced through possibilities. Military-grade helicopters with night vision and GPS could navigate the storm, but it would take serious resources and motivation to launch such an operation in these conditions. The kind of motivation that came with protecting a $2 billion secret. How long before they can land? Sarah asked. He studied the lights, counting at least 2 aircraft circling in a search pattern. 10 minutes, maybe 15 if they're being careful about the landing zone. Sarah closed the laptop and handed it to him. Everything I have is on there. Names, dates, financial records, enough to bring down half the Pentagon if it reaches the right people. What are you talking about? But even as he asked, he could see the resignation in her posture, the way she'd already made her decision. I'm going out there, like hell you are. Marcus, they're not here for you. If I surrender myself, they'll kill you the moment you step outside. His voice carried the certainty of someone who'd seen how these games were played. And then they'll kill me for being a witness. She stared at him, understanding dawning in her expression. I'm sorry. I never meant to drag you into this. The lights were closer now, the sound of rotors cutting through the wind. Marcus felt the familiar weight settling on his shoulders, the same feeling he'd had in Kandahar when everything went sideways, the moment when running was no longer an option and the only way out was through. He moved to the gun safe in the corner, his fingers working the combination with muscle memory. The familiar weight of his rifle felt both foreign and natural in his hands after months of handling only medical supplies and dog equipment. How many people know about this place? Sarah asked. Officially, no one. He checked the rifle's action, counting ammunition, but if they're here, someone talked. The helicopters were almost overhead now, their searchlights sweeping across the clearing. Marcus killed the cabin's lights, plunging them into darkness broken only by the strobing beams from above. Stay low, he told Sarah, and whatever happens, don't let them take you alive. The satellite phone's encrypted line crackled to life at 0300 hours, jarring Marcus from the first real sleep he'd managed in days. He rolled from the couch where he'd been keeping watch over Elena, noting that her fever had finally broken sometime during the night. Trace. Marcus. It's Sarah. The voice belonged to his former intelligence contact, now buried deep in some government acronym he'd never bothered to learn. We need to talk. Now. He stepped into the kitchen, keeping his voice low. About what? About the woman you're harboring. Elena Kozlov isn't some lost tourist, Marcus. She's a former Russian FSB operative who went dark 18 months ago with enough classified intel to start World War III. The words hit him like ice water. He glanced toward the bedroom where Elena lay sleeping, looking fragile and innocent in the morning light filtering through the cabin windows. You're sure about this? Dead certain. She was part of a deep cover operation targeting American military assets. The question is whether she's still working for them or if she's genuinely trying to defect. Either way, she's got a kill order on her head from both sides. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the familiar weight of impossible choices settling on his shoulders. What kind of intel? The kind that could compromise every Black Ops mission we've run in the last 5 years, including yours. Sarah's voice carried an edge he'd never heard before. Marcus, if the wrong people get their hands on what's in her head, a lot of good operators are going to die. Through the window, he watched Ghost and Kodiak making their morning patrol of the perimeter. The dogs had been restless since Elena arrived, their protective instincts in overdrive. Now he understood why. There's more, Sarah continued. The team that was tracking her, they weren't Russian. They were ours. Black budget, no oversight. Someone high up the chain wants her silenced permanently. Who? That's what I'm trying to figure out. But Marcus, you need to understand. By helping her, you've painted a target on your own back. These people don't leave loose ends. He thought about the precision of the attack on Elena's cabin, the professional efficiency of it. American training, Russian brutality. A perfect hybrid designed to look like foreign interference while serving domestic interests. How long do I have? Maybe 12 hours before they track the medical supply theft back to you. After that, Sarah's pause spoke volumes. I can try to run interference, but my reach only goes so far. Marcus ended the call and stood in his kitchen, staring at the coffee cup Elena had used the night before. Everything she'd told him could be lies. The vulnerability, the fear, the way she'd looked at him when he'd tended to her wounds, all of it could be an elaborate performance. But the dogs didn't lie. Ghost and Kodiak had protected her with the same fierce loyalty they'd shown to Marcus himself. In 12 years of working with rescue animals, he'd learned to trust their instincts above his own. He walked back to the bedroom and found Elena awake, watching him with those unsettling pale eyes. You know, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. I know enough. He sat on the edge of the chair beside the bed. FSB, deep cover, enough classified intel to get a lot of people killed. She closed her eyes and exhaled slowly. What will you do? That depends on whether you're going to keep lying to me. When she looked at him again, something fundamental had shifted in her expression. The mask of the helpless refugee had fallen away, replaced by the cold assessment of a trained operative. My real name is Elena Kozlova. Everything else I told you was true. I was left for dead. I've been running for 18 months, and yes, I have information that certain people would kill for. She pushed herself up against the pillows, wincing at the movement. But I'm not the villain in this story, Marcus. Then who is? Someone in your government has been selling American soldiers to Russian intelligence. Names, locations, mission parameters. Enough information to set perfect ambushes. Her voice carried a weight of terrible certainty. I was the courier for those transactions until I discovered what the intelligence was being used for. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. How many? 17 confirmed kills over 8 months, all made to look like operational hazards or enemy action. The number hung in the air between them like smoke from a funeral pyre. 17 American soldiers dead because someone had traded their lives for Russian gold. I have proof, Elena continued. Financial records, communication logs, everything needed to identify the traitor. That's why they want me dead. Outside, Ghost began to bark. Not his usual alert, but the sharp, urgent warning that meant immediate danger. Marcus was moving before the sound fully registered, reaching for his rifle as footsteps crunched through snow toward the cabin. They were out of time. The satellite phone's shrill ring cut through the cabin's silence like a blade. Marcus froze, his coffee mug halfway to his lips. 3 rings, 4. The woman, Elena, she'd finally told him her real name, stirred on the couch, her fever-bright eyes snapping open with the hypervigilance of someone who'd lived too long expecting death to come calling. Don't answer it, she whispered, struggling to sit up despite the pain medication. Please. But Marcus was already moving. In his world, ignored calls meant dead teammates, blown operations, lives hanging in the balance. His hand closed around the phone. Reeves. Marcus, thank Christ. The voice belonged to Tommy Nguyen, his old spotter from the teams. Tommy had always been the calm one, the steady hand that kept Marcus grounded during the worst ops. Hearing panic in his voice now sent ice water through Marcus's veins. We need to talk. Now, Tommy. I'm dealing with something here. About a certain package that went missing 3 days ago? Yeah, I know. Marcus, you need to listen very carefully. There are people coming for her, professional people, the kind that don't leave witnesses. Elena had gone pale as winter ice. She was shaking her head frantically, mouthing words Marcus couldn't catch. Outside, both dogs suddenly began barking, not their usual alerts, but something deeper, more urgent. How many? Marcus asked, already moving toward his weapons cache. Unclear, but Marcus, there's something else. The intel she's carrying. It's not just about some corporate cover-up. It's about Operation Nightfall. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. His vision tunneled, and suddenly he was back in that Syrian warehouse, watching his team die one by one, tasting blood and cordite and failure. Elena was watching him with knowing eyes, and he realized she'd seen that look before. In mirrors, probably, after her own nightmares came calling. That's impossible, he managed. Nightfall was buried, all records destroyed. That's what they told us. But she's got proof, Marcus. Real proof. Video files, communications, financial records. Everything that shows how they threw away 12 good operators to protect a weapons deal with the same people we'd been hunting for years. Marcus's hands were steady as he checked his rifle, muscle memory taking over while his mind reeled. Who else knows about this? Too many people, and none of them are our friends. Marcus, if what she's carrying gets out, it'll bring down half the intelligence community. They'll kill everyone in a 50-mile radius to keep it quiet. Through the window, Marcus could see his dogs positioned at the tree line, hackles raised, facing north. Their body language spoke of imminent threat, something moving through the wilderness with purpose and skill. Professional people, just like Tommy had warned. How long do I have? Maybe an hour if you're lucky. There's an extraction point at Devil's Backbone Ridge. Can you get her there? Marcus looked at Elena, who was already trying to stand despite her injuries. The woman was running on pure determination, and whatever secrets were burning holes in her conscience. She can barely walk. Then you better find another way, because if they take her alive, she'll wish they hadn't. And Marcus? They know about your history with Nightfall. This isn't just about cleaning up loose ends anymore. It's personal. The line went dead. Elena was struggling into her boots, wincing with each movement. I heard enough, she said. We need to go. Now. You're in no condition to... I'm in no condition to die here either. Her green eyes were fierce despite the fever. I've been running for 3 days, and I'll keep running until this gets out. Too many good people have died already. Marcus whistled sharply, and both dogs came bounding back to the cabin. They knew the signals, knew something had shifted into survival mode. He grabbed his emergency pack, already loaded with supplies, and helped Elena to her feet. Can you ride? He asked, nodding toward the snowmobiles outside. Do I have a choice? They moved toward the door, but Kodiak suddenly planted himself in front of Elena, blocking her path. The big husky stared up at her with those unsettling, intelligent eyes, then did something Marcus had never seen before. He gently took her wrist in his mouth, not biting, just holding. What's he doing? Elena whispered. Marcus felt that familiar chill run down his spine. His dogs knew things, saw things that others missed. I think he's trying to tell us something. Nanook joined his packmate, positioning himself at Elena's other side. Both animals were trembling slightly, their eyes fixed on the northern tree line where shadows moved with deadly purpose. They're here, Elena breathed. The first rifle shot shattered the cabin's front window, sending glass cascading across the floor where they'd been standing moments before. Marcus shoved Elena toward the back door as automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions, turning his sanctuary into a killing zone. The hunt had found them. The storm hit harder than Jake had anticipated. What started as light snowfall had transformed into a blizzard that turned the world white and shapeless. He pressed his back against the cabin wall, watching through frosted windows as the wind howled like something alive and angry. Elena sat by the fire, her fingers wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. The color had returned to her cheeks, but her eyes held that same haunted quality that never seemed to fade. She'd been quiet since their conversation about trust, and Jake found himself stealing glances at her, trying to read the thoughts behind her careful expressions. "The storm should pass by morning," he said, settling into the chair across from her. Bear and Luna had claimed their usual spots near the hearth, but he noticed how they kept their ears pricked, alert despite the peaceful scene. Elena nodded, then surprised him by speaking. "Tell me about them." She gestured toward the dogs. "How did you know they'd find me?" Jake studied her face. It was an innocent enough question, but something in her tone suggested otherwise. "I didn't. They're search and rescue dogs, but they're also trained for other things." "What other things?" The directness of her question made him pause. "Detection work. They can find more than just lost hikers." A log shifted in the fireplace, sending sparks up the chimney. Elena's grip tightened on her mug. "What kind of detection?" Jake felt the familiar weight of suspicion settling in his chest. "Depends on what they're trained for. Drugs, explosives, weapons." He watched her reaction carefully. People carrying things they shouldn't be. Elena's face remained carefully neutral, but he caught the slight tension in her shoulders. "Is that what you think I was carrying?" "I don't know what to think about you, Elena. Every time I get close to an answer, you give me more questions." The wind rattled the windows, and Luna lifted her head, a low whine escaping her throat. Bear joined her, both dogs suddenly alert and focused on something Jake couldn't detect. "What is it?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake was already moving toward the window, his instincts sharpening. Through the swirling snow, he caught glimpses of movement, dark shapes that didn't belong to the natural rhythm of the storm. His hand moved automatically to the weapon he kept holstered under his jacket. "Stay by the fire," he ordered, his voice taking on the commanding tone he'd used in the field. "Don't move unless I tell you to." Elena's face went pale. "They found me." "Who found you?" Jake spun to face her, but she was already standing, her mug forgotten on the floor where coffee pooled like a dark stain. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never meant for this to happen. I never meant to bring them to you." The dogs were on their feet now, positioned between Elena and the door, their training kicking in. Jake felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came before action, his body remembering lessons learned in places where mistakes meant death. "Talk to me, Elena, right now. Who's out there?" Her hands shook as she pressed them against her temples. "Victor's men. They've been tracking me since I ran. I thought the storm would hide me, but—" A sharp crack echoed through the night, followed by the distinctive whistle of something cutting through the air. Jake tackled Elena to the floor as the front window exploded inward, glass and snow spraying across the cabin's interior. "Basement," Jake growled, pulling her toward a trapdoor hidden beneath a rug near the kitchen. "There's a tunnel that leads to the workshop behind the cabin." "I won't run anymore," Elena said, her voice suddenly steady despite the chaos erupting around them. "I'm tired of running." Another shot shattered what remained of the window. Jake could hear voices now, speaking in what sounded like Russian, coordinating their approach. Professional voices, military precision. "You'll run because staying here gets us both killed," Jake said, hauling open the trapdoor, "and because I need answers and dead people don't talk." Bear barked sharply, a warning that meant immediate danger. Jake knew they had seconds before the assault began in earnest. He grabbed Elena's shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Whatever you're carrying, whatever you know, it dies with you if we don't move. Now." Elena nodded, finally understanding. She dropped through the trapdoor into the darkness below, and Jake followed, Bear and Luna close behind. The last thing he saw before sealing the entrance was the red dot of a laser sight tracking across the cabin wall where they'd been standing. As they crawled through the narrow tunnel, Elena's voice reached him through the darkness. The flash drive isn't just evidence. It's the location of something Victor has been searching for his entire life. What location? A weapons cache, Soviet era, hidden during the Cold War and forgotten by everyone except a few old men who are dying off one by one. Jake felt the pieces clicking into place like chambers in a revolver. And you know where it is. I am the map. The satellite phone's shrill ring cut through the morning stillness like a blade. Marcus had been watching Elena through the cabin window, noting how she moved differently now, less like prey, more like a predator remembering her training. When he answered, the voice on the other end made his blood freeze. "Hello, Marcus. It's been a long time." Colonel Harrison Pike, the man who'd sent him into that godforsaken valley in Afghanistan, the man whose orders had gotten half his team killed. "What do you want, Pike?" "I think you know. We need to talk about your house guest." Marcus stepped outside, leaving Elena inside with the dogs. The morning air bit at his face, but he barely felt it. "She's got nothing to do with you." Pike's laugh was dry as sand. "Elena Vasquez has everything to do with me. She was one of mine before she went rogue, before she stole classified intelligence that could compromise operations spanning 3 continents. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Elena's fighting skills, her knowledge of surveillance techniques, the way she'd assessed every exit in his cabin within minutes of arriving. "You're lying." "Am I?" "Ask her about Operation Nightfall. Ask her about the files she copied from the Kandahar facility. Ask her why Kozlov's men weren't trying to capture her. They were trying to silence her before she could sell what she knows." Through the window, Marcus watched Elena examining his bookshelf, her fingers trailing over the spines with casual interest. But her reflection in the glass showed eyes that never stopped moving, cataloging, calculating. "Even if that's true, she's under my protection now." "Your protection?" Pike's voice turned sharp. "You couldn't protect your own team, Marcus. What makes you think you can protect her?" The words hit like a physical blow. Marcus closed his eyes, fighting back the images that always lurked at the edges of his mind. His teammates' faces, the explosion, the screams. Pike had orchestrated that mission, insisted on the intelligence that proved fatally wrong. "That wasn't my failure. That was yours. History is written by the survivors, son. And right now you're harboring a traitor who's got half the intelligence community hunting her. That makes you a target too." The line went dead. Marcus stood in the snow, rage and doubt warring in his chest. Inside, Elena had moved to the kitchen, making coffee with the easy familiarity of someone comfortable in any environment. When she saw his expression, her hand instinctively moved toward the knife block. "Who was that?" "Someone from my past. Someone who claims to know about yours." Her face went carefully blank. "What did they tell you?" "That your name is Elena Vasquez, that you stole classified intelligence, that Kozlov wasn't trying to kidnap you, he was trying to kill you." For a long moment, the only sound was the coffee maker gurgling. Then Elena set down her mug and met his eyes directly. "It's true." The simple admission hit harder than any elaborate lie would have. Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath him, everything he'd believed about her crumbling, all of it, most of it. She moved slowly, keeping her hands visible. "I was military intelligence, embedded with a joint task force in Afghanistan. I discovered that someone high up was selling information to the highest bidder. Americans died because of those leaks. So you went rogue." "I tried official channels first, filed reports, followed protocol. Nothing happened. The leaks continued, more people died." Her voice hardened. "So yes, I took the evidence myself. Names, dates, bank transfers, everything needed to expose the network." Marcus thought of Pike's voice, the casual way he'd dismissed the team's deaths in Afghanistan. "Who's the source?" "Colonel Harrison Pike. The confirmation felt like ice water in his veins. Marcus sank into a chair, processing the implications. Pike had sent his team into that valley knowing it was compromised, had probably sold that information himself. The men who've been hunting you, Pike's cleanup crew. He's been systematically eliminating everyone who might expose him. I'm the last one with evidence. Outside, the dogs began barking. Marcus moved to the window and saw movement in the tree line, dark figures advancing with military precision. His blood turned to ice. They found us. Elena was already moving, checking the rifle he'd given her. How many? 6 that I can see. Probably more. We need to move. Now. Marcus grabbed his gear bag and whistled for the dogs. Kodiak and Nanook came instantly, sensing the urgency. As they prepared to leave through the back door, Elena caught his arm. Marcus, I know you don't trust me anymore, but Pike killed your team. He'll kill you too if it serves his purpose. The sound of boots crunching through snow was getting closer. Marcus looked into Elena's eyes and made his choice. Then I guess we better make sure he doesn't get the chance. The helicopter's rotors cut through the morning air like a death knell as Marcus watched it disappear over the tree line. Natasha stood beside him, her breath visible in small puffs of vapor, her injured leg favoring her weight against the makeshift crutch he'd fashioned from a birch branch. They'll be back, she said quietly, her Russian accent more pronounced in her exhaustion. Kozlov doesn't give up easily. Marcus shouldered his rifle and whistled for Bear and Luna, who immediately flanked them. The dogs' ears remained alert, their bodies tense with the residual energy of the morning's chaos. The cabin behind them was a smoking ruin, years of careful solitude reduced to ash and memory. How many men does he have? Marcus asked, helping Natasha navigate the uneven terrain as they moved deeper into the forest. He'd cached supplies in 3 different locations within a 5-mile radius, a habit from his military days that now seemed prophetic rather than paranoid. Enough. She winced as her foot caught on a root. But it's not just the numbers, Marcus. It's what he represents. The organization I stole from, they have resources, connections, government contracts in 6 countries. They reached the first cache 30 minutes later, hidden beneath a fallen log that looked unremarkable among dozens of others. Marcus pulled out a waterproof container holding ammunition, emergency rations, and a satellite phone he'd hoped never to use. The device felt heavy in his hands, weighted with implications. There's something else, Natasha said, watching him stare at the phone. About your team in Kandahar. Marcus's hands stilled. What about them? The intelligence that led to the ambush, it didn't come from Taliban sources. Her voice was barely above a whisper. It came from Kozlov's network, a test run for their information brokering system. The words hit him like a physical blow. Marcus had spent 3 years replaying that mission, analyzing every decision, wondering if he could have saved Rodriguez, Chen, and Morrison. The guilt had driven him to this wilderness, to this self-imposed exile where the only lives he was responsible for belonged to 2 rescue dogs. You're saying my men died because of corporate espionage? His voice came out flat, dangerous. I'm saying they died because someone was willing to sell American military intelligence to the highest bidder, the same system I've been trying to expose. She reached into her jacket and pulled out the flash drive, the small device that had already cost so much. This contains 3 years of transactions, payments, sources, operations, including Kandahar. Bear suddenly went rigid, his nose lifting to test the wind. Luna followed suit, both dogs positioning themselves between Marcus and something in the distance. The forest had gone quiet, even the morning bird calls fading to an ominous silence. How far to the next cache? Natasha whispered. 2 miles north. Marcus checked his rifle, muscle memory taking over as his mind processed tactical options. But they'll be watching the obvious routes. Then we go east, toward the river. Marcus nodded, recognizing the wisdom in her suggestion. The terrain would be rougher, but the sound of running water would mask their movement. They set off through the undergrowth, Bear and Luna ranging ahead like silent sentries. 20 minutes later, they heard the dogs again, but not his dogs. The distant baying of tracking hounds carried on the wind, professional and relentless. Kozlov had brought reinforcements. "How long do we have?" Natasha asked, her face pale but determined. "Depends on how fresh our scent trail is. Maybe an hour." Marcus pulled out the satellite phone and powered it up. The device searched for signals, seconds stretching like hours until it finally connected. "I know someone who owes me a favor." The call connected on the second ring. "I was wondering when you'd surface again," came a familiar voice. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, his former commanding officer, now working intelligence out of Anchorage. "I need an extraction, Sarah. 2 persons, coordinates to follow." "Marcus, you've been off the grid for 3 years. What kind of trouble are you in?" He looked at Natasha, at the flash drive in her hand, at the dogs who'd started this entire chain of events by refusing to let a stranger die in the snow. The kind that might finally give us answers about Kandahar. There was a long pause. "Send me the coordinates. I'll have a bird in the air in 20 minutes. There's something else. We're being hunted by Russian contractors. They'll shoot down anything military. Then I guess we'll have to make sure they don't see us coming." Sarah's voice carried the same steel he remembered from their deployment days. "Marcus, whatever you've found, whatever this is about, we'll handle it. Your team deserved better than what happened to them." As he ended the call, the sound of tracking dogs grew closer. Marcus shouldered his pack and helped Natasha to her feet. They had promises to keep and debts to settle, but first they had to survive the next hour. The forest waited, patient and unforgiving, as they disappeared into its depths. The warehouse smelled of rust and diesel fuel, its cavernous interior punctuated by the steady drip of melting snow from the corrugated roof. Marcus crouched behind a stack of shipping containers, watching the shadows dance across the concrete floor as armed figures moved between the maze of crates. His breath came in controlled puffs, years of training keeping his heart rate steady despite the chaos that had brought him here. Natasha lay unconscious 20 yards away, zip-tied to a metal chair in the center of the space. Blood trickled from a cut above her left eye, and her head lolled forward at an unnatural angle. 3 men stood around her, their voices echoing off the warehouse walls as they debated in rapid Russian. Marcus counted at least 8 hostiles, maybe more hidden in the shadows. The tactical part of his brain catalogued their positions, their weapons, the angles of approach. But another part of him, the part that had been running from memories for 3 years, recognized the setup, the isolation, the systematic brutality, the cold efficiency of men who viewed human life as expendable. Kabul rushed back to him in fragments. The compound, the screaming, Sarah's voice cutting through the gunfire, calling his name before everything went silent. He shook his head, forcing himself back to the present. Natasha needed him here, now, not lost in the ghosts of Afghanistan. His satellite phone buzzed once against his chest, the signal he'd been waiting for. Rex and Coda were in position at the rear entrance, ready to create the distraction he needed. The dogs had tracked them here through 2 miles of forest, their noses locked onto Natasha's scent trail, even as it mingled with exhaust fumes and gun oil. Marcus checked his rifle one last time, then triggered the remote device clipped to his belt. 30 seconds later, the warehouse's rear loading bay erupted in controlled chaos as Rex and Coda burst through, barking and snarling with the fury of wolves protecting their pack. Shouts erupted from the back of the building as men scrambled to respond to the unexpected canine assault. Moving like smoke, Marcus slipped between the containers, closing the distance to Natasha's position. The 3 guards around her had turned toward the commotion, automatic weapons raised. One spoke urgently into a radio, while the other 2 advanced toward the rear of the building. Marcus took the radio operator first, a precise shot that dropped him silently to the concrete. The second guard turned at the sound of his partner falling, but Marcus was already moving, emerging from cover with his knife drawn. The blade found its mark before the man could raise his weapon. The third guard spun toward him, finger tightening on his trigger, but froze as a low growl echoed from the shadows behind him. Coda materialized like a wraith, 85 pounds of muscle and fury poised to strike. The distraction cost the gunman his life. Marcus cut Natasha's restraints with quick, efficient motions. She stirred as he lifted her, her eyes fluttering open with unfocused confusion. "Marcus?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here. We're leaving." But as he turned toward the exit, Viktor Kozlov stepped from behind a shipping container, flanked by 4 more men. The Russian's weathered face wore the same cold smile Marcus remembered from the intelligence photos, the same predatory calculation that had made him one of Moscow's most effective killers. "Mr. Chen," Viktor said, his English heavily accented but precise, "you are proving to be quite resourceful, but this chase ends here." Marcus shifted Natasha's weight, keeping her body between himself and Viktor's men while his free hand moved slowly toward the pistol at his hip. "Let her go, Viktor. This is between you and me now." Viktor laughed, the sound echoing off the warehouse walls. "You still do not understand, do you? This woman destroyed everything I built, stole my life's work, murdered my brother." His eyes hardened. "There is no negotiation here, only justice." "Justice?" Marcus felt anger flare in his chest. "You mean revenge?" In Russia, they are often the same thing. The standoff stretched like a taut wire, 4 gun barrels trained on Marcus while he calculated angles and distances. Natasha's breathing was shallow against his chest, her body trembling with shock and blood loss. In the distance, he could hear Rex and Coda still wreaking havoc among Viktor's men, but it wouldn't last long. Professional soldiers would regroup quickly. "You know," Viktor continued conversationally, "I studied your file before coming here. Afghanistan was quite the tragedy, wasn't it? Your entire team. That woman you loved." He tilted his head. "Sarah, yes? Such a waste." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow, threatening to drag him back into the darkness he'd spent years fighting. But as Natasha stirred in his arms, as her fingers clutched weakly at his jacket, he found something he thought he'd lost forever in that Afghan compound. A reason to fight back. The safe house felt like a tomb. Marcus pressed his back against the reinforced door, listening to the wind howl through the trees outside, while his mind raced through their dwindling options. Elena sat hunched over the small table, her fingers dancing across the laptop keyboard with desperate precision. The blue glow from the screen cast harsh shadows across her face, making the bruises from their escape look like war paint. "How long?" he asked, checking his watch for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. 2 hours, maybe 3. Her voice was steady, but he caught the tremor underneath. "The encryption is military grade, but I know the architecture. I helped design it." Through the window, Marcus spotted movement in the tree line. Not the random sway of branches, but deliberate, coordinated motion. He counted at least 6 positions, probably more. Kozlov's men had found them faster than anticipated. "We don't have 3 hours." He moved to the weapons cache he'd hidden years ago, pulling out an AR-15 and checking the magazine. 40 rounds, not enough for a prolonged firefight, but it would have to do. "Can you work while we move?" Elena's laugh held no humor. "You want me to crack a government database while running through the forest? I want you alive." The words came out harsher than he intended. "They're surrounding us." She looked up from the screen, seeing something in his expression that made her nod without argument. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, copying files to an encrypted drive. "Give me 60 seconds." A branch snapped somewhere to their left, then another. They weren't bothering with stealth anymore. Marcus whistled low, a sound that cut through the storm. Within moments, Storm and Yukon appeared at the window, their fur matted with snow and their eyes alert. He opened the reinforced glass just enough for them to slip inside. 12 men, he said, reading their body language like a field report. Maybe more. Moving in from the north and east, Elena's hands never stopped moving. 30 more seconds. The first shot shattered the front window, sending glass cascading across the floor. Marcus grabbed Elena, pulling her down as more gunfire erupted. The safe house had been built to withstand an assault, but not indefinitely. "Now would be good," he said, returning fire through the broken window. Got it. She yanked the drive free and stuffed the laptop into her pack. But, Marcus, what I found... Another window exploded inward. Storm growled low, positioning himself between Elena and the threat. Yukon had disappeared, likely circling to their planned escape route. Tell me when we're clear. Marcus grabbed emergency supplies from under the floorboards, thermal blankets, MREs, ammunition, and a satellite phone he prayed still worked. Back door now. They moved in practiced coordination despite never having trained together. Elena stayed low and followed his lead while Storm took point. The rear exit opened onto a narrow trail that wound through dense forest, their best chance of losing pursuit in terrain Marcus knew intimately. The cold hit them like a physical blow. Without proper winter gear, they had maybe an hour before hypothermia became a real threat. Elena's breath came in sharp puffs as they half ran, half slid down the icy slope behind the cabin. The data confirms everything, she said between breaths. Operation Nightfall wasn't just about eliminating targets. They were testing something, a new kind of biological agent. Marcus felt his blood freeze in a way that had nothing to do with the Alaskan cold. Biological agent? Your team was exposed during the mission. Whatever they gave you wasn't treatment, it was monitoring. They've been tracking the long-term effects for 15 years. Behind them, shouts echoed through the trees. Kozlov's men had breached the safe house and discovered their escape route. The pursuit would be relentless now. The other members of your team, Elena continued, stumbling slightly on the uneven ground, the ones who died in accidents, they were eliminated when the side effects became too pronounced to hide. What kind of side effects? But even as he asked, Marcus knew. The nightmares that felt too real, the way he could sense things before they happened, the connection he shared with his dogs that went beyond normal animal bonding, enhanced cognitive function, increased sensory perception, accelerated healing. Elena's voice carried a mixture of awe and horror. They were trying to create super soldiers, and you were the test subject who survived. Yukon materialized ahead of them, leading them toward a hidden cave system Marcus had discovered years earlier. The dog's unusual intelligence, his almost supernatural ability to understand complex commands. Suddenly it all made terrible sense. They didn't just experiment on me, Marcus said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. They got to Storm and Yukon too. Elena nodded grimly. The data suggests they've been monitoring all of you, every rescue, every mission with your dogs. It's all been recorded, analyzed, studied. The cave entrance appeared through the swirling snow, safety, at least temporarily. But as they ducked inside the narrow opening, Marcus realized they weren't just running from Kozlov anymore. They were fleeing from the truth of what he'd become and what those who'd created him would do to keep their secrets buried. The satellite phone's screen glowed in the pre-dawn darkness as Marcus scrolled through the encrypted files Elena had sent him. Each document felt like a punch to the gut. Mission reports he'd never seen, communications between his commanding officers and intelligence agencies. Photos of locations he'd destroyed without ever knowing what they truly contained. Jesus Christ, he whispered, his hands trembling as he read about Operation Silent Thunder, the mission that had cost him everything, that had left him with nightmares and a purple heart he'd thrown in a drawer and tried to forget. According to these files, the weapons cache they'd been sent to destroy hadn't been a terrorist stockpile at all. It had been a humanitarian aid depot, medicine and supplies meant for refugee camps. The explosion he'd triggered had killed 17 aid workers sleeping in a nearby building, workers whose presence had been deliberately hidden from his team. Maya stirred beside the dying fire, her breathing still labored but steadier than it had been in days. The antibiotics were finally winning their battle against the infection, but she remained unconscious, caught between sleep and something deeper. Ghost lay pressed against her side, the dog's instincts still telling him she needed protection. Marcus set the phone aside and walked to the cabin's single window, staring out at the wilderness that had become his refuge. For 8 years, he'd convinced himself that the guilt was just part of war, that the nightmares were the price every soldier paid. But now he knew the truth was far worse. He'd been used, manipulated. The intelligence had been falsified, the mission parameters designed to eliminate witnesses to something larger. And Maya, Elena, had been part of the machine that had fed him lies. The sound of approaching vehicles cut through the morning silence. Marcus grabbed his rifle and moved to the window, counting at least 3 snowmobiles cutting through the trees. They moved with military precision, spreading out to surround the cabin. Professional, deadly. Maya. He shook her shoulder gently, relief flooding through him when her eyes fluttered open. "We've got company." She struggled to sit up, her face pale but alert. "How many?" 6, maybe 8. "They're not here to talk." Marcus was already moving, gathering supplies and ammunition. "There's a back trail through the ravine. It's steep, but I can't run." Her voice was matter-of-fact, no self-pity. "My leg, the fever. I'll slow you down and get us both killed. Then, we make our stand here. Marcus, listen to me." She grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "The files I sent you, that's not everything. There's more, hidden in a safe deposit box in Anchorage. Bank of the North, box 2847. The key is sewn into the lining of my jacket." The snowmobiles had stopped. Through the window, Marcus could see figures moving through the trees, surrounding the cabin with practiced efficiency. They wore white winter camouflage and carried military-grade weapons. "What else?" he asked, checking his rifle's magazine. Operation Silent Thunder was just the beginning. They'd been running false flag operations for years, using Special Forces teams as unwitting pawns. Your team wasn't the only one. Her breathing was getting labored again from the effort of talking. "The evidence in that box, it could bring down half the Pentagon." A voice called out from the trees, amplified by a bullhorn. "Elena Vasquez, we know you're in there. Come out unarmed and we can discuss this civilly." Marcus almost laughed at the absurdity. Nothing about 8 armed men surrounding his cabin suggested civil discussion. "There's something else," Maya whispered urgently. "The reason they want me dead isn't just about what I know. It's about what I took, financial records, payment authorizations. The whole operation was funded through black budget programs, billions of dollars that were supposed to go to veteran benefits, to military families." The pieces clicked into place for Marcus. The abandoned veterans he'd met in Anchorage, men and women who couldn't get the medical care they needed, the families struggling while defense contractors grew rich, his own difficulty getting treatment for PTSD when he'd first come home. Ghost suddenly raised his head, hackles rising. Through his bond with the dog, Marcus felt what the animal sensed, more movement coming from the ravine behind the cabin. They were completely surrounded. "Elena," the voice called again. "You have 60 seconds to come out. After that, we come in." Marcus looked down at Maya. Elena, this woman who had stumbled into his world carrying secrets that could shake the foundations of everything he'd once believed in. She'd lied to him about who she was, but she'd also given him the truth about what he'd done, what had been done to him. "The key," he said, reaching for her jacket. She nodded weakly. "Third button from the bottom. There's a small slit." His fingers found the hidden opening, extracting a small brass key. He slipped it into his pocket next to his dog tags. 30 seconds left, maybe less. The explosion that should have killed them both had instead brought down half the mountainside, creating a natural barrier between Marcus's cabin and the approaching mercenaries. Through the settling dust and debris, Marcus could hear Kozlov's men regrouping, their shouts echoing off the canyon walls as they searched for another route up. Elena pressed her back against the overturned table they'd taken shelter behind, her breathing labored but steady. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage on her shoulder, but her eyes remained sharp, calculating. "The data drive," she said, checking the small device still secure in her jacket pocket. "We can't let them get it." "We won't." Marcus crawled to the shattered window, peering through the smoke at the chaos outside. His dogs had taken cover in the tree line, their dark forms barely visible among the pines. He whistled low, a command they'd practiced countless times. Within seconds, Bear appeared at the cabin's rear entrance, followed by Scout and Rex. "Good boys," Marcus murmured, relief flooding through him. He'd trained them for combat situations, but seeing them safe still made his chest tight with emotion he couldn't afford right now. Elena struggled to her feet, using the wall for support. "There's a backup exfiltration point 12 clicks north, a helicopter pad built into the ridge. If we can reach it—" If. Marcus checked his remaining ammunition. 2 clips for his rifle, half a magazine in his sidearm. Not nearly enough for a running firefight through hostile territory. Kozlov's got at least 8 men left, plus whatever air support he's called in. We're outnumbered and outgunned. Then we don't fight them head-on. Elena's smile was grim but determined. We make them come to us on our terms. Outside, the sound of engines grew louder. ATVs, by the sound of it, finding their way around the rock slide. Marcus estimated maybe 20 minutes before they'd be surrounded again. "The mine shaft," he said suddenly. "About half a mile northeast of here. It connects to a network of abandoned tunnels that come out near that ridge you mentioned." Elena nodded slowly. "Underground. They won't expect that." Marcus gathered what supplies he could salvage from the ruins of his cabin. Water, first aid kit, emergency flares. Everything else he'd built here over the past 5 years was gone, destroyed by the very past he'd tried so hard to escape. The irony wasn't lost on him. They slipped out the back as the first ATV crested the rise to their south. The dogs moved like shadows through the forest, their training taking over as they scouted ahead, silent and deadly efficient. Marcus had saved them all from various fates, Bear from a fighting ring, Scout from neglect, Rex from a shelter's euthanasia list. Now they were returning the favor. The entrance to the old copper mine was partially concealed by decades of overgrowth. Marcus pulled aside the rusted warning signs and corroded metal grating. The smell that wafted up was stale and metallic, tinged with the dampness of places long forgotten by sunlight. "Stay close," he told Elena, switching on his tactical flashlight. These tunnels were abandoned for a reason. Cave-ins, unstable supports, pockets of bad air. They descended into the earth, the dogs padding silently behind them. The main shaft dropped at a steep angle for nearly 100 feet before leveling out into a network of branching passages. Marcus chose the tunnel that headed northeast, hoping his sense of direction held true underground. Behind them, faintly but growing closer, came the sound of pursuit. Kozlov's men had found the mine entrance. "How did you know?" Elena asked as they moved through the darkness, her voice barely above a whisper. "About the tunnels connecting to the ridge?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "Because that's where we set up our forward operating base during the Kandahar extraction. The mission where my team died." The words came out harder than he'd intended. "I've been running from that place for 5 years, and now I'm heading straight back to it." Elena caught his arm, stopping him. In the beam of his flashlight, her face was pale but resolute. "Marcus, what happened in Kandahar wasn't your fault. The intelligence was compromised from the beginning. We know that now. Knowing and feeling are different things." He pulled free, continuing deeper into the tunnel. "4 good men died because I made the call to proceed, because I trusted the wrong people. And now you're trusting me." Her voice was soft, vulnerable in a way he hadn't heard before. "Even though I brought this nightmare to your doorstep." Marcus paused, listening to the echo of their pursuers growing fainter. The tunnel was working, buying them time and distance. But Elena was right. He was trusting her, despite every instinct screaming that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. "Yeah," he said finally, "I guess I am." The passage ahead split into 3 directions. Marcus chose the middle path, following the faint current of air that suggested an exit somewhere in the distance. Behind them, the darkness swallowed their footsteps as they pressed deeper into the mountain's heart. The helicopter's rotors cut through the dawn sky as Marcus watched the Alaskan wilderness shrink beneath them. Elena's hand found his across the narrow cabin space. her fingers interlacing with his in a gesture that had become natural over the past 3 days of recovery. The bandages around her shoulder were clean now, the fever finally broken. Behind them, Kodiak and Bear pressed their noses against the small windows, their breath fogging the glass. Marcus smiled despite everything they'd endured. Even airborne, his dogs were still working, still alert, still his partners in whatever came next. "The safe house is 40 minutes out," Agent Rivera's voice crackled through the headset. She sat across from them, her laptop balanced on her knees as she coordinated with teams across 3 states. "Kozlov's network is fragmenting faster than we anticipated. Your intel was the keystone we needed." Elena's grip tightened slightly. "What about the others? The women still trapped in those facilities?" Raids went down simultaneously at dawn. Phoenix, Seattle, and Denver. "We've recovered 37 victims so far, and the operation is still active." Rivera's expression softened marginally. "Your sacrifice mattered, Elena. They're free because you had the courage to run." Marcus studied Elena's profile as she absorbed this news. The relief in her eyes was profound, but he could see the weight she still carried. Survival guilt was something he understood intimately, the burden of making it out when others didn't, the endless wondering if you could have done more. "The government's witness protection program is comprehensive," Rivera continued, pulling up files on her screen. "New identities, relocation assistance, psychological support. You'd be completely safe and completely alone," Elena said quietly. The words hung in the cabin like a challenge. Marcus felt his chest tighten as he realized they were approaching the moment he'd been dreading since they'd called for extraction. In all his military missions, the hardest part had always been the end, when the objective was complete, but the bonds forged in combat had to be severed. "There are other options," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty churning in his gut. Rivera raised an eyebrow. "What kind of options?" "My land is remote, defensible. I've got resources, training, and a support network of people who ask the right kinds of questions." He looked directly at Elena. "If you wanted to disappear, really disappear, there are worse places to start over." Elena turned to face him fully, searching his expression. "You're offering to let me stay?" "I'm offering to let you heal, whatever that looks like." The words felt clumsy in his mouth, inadequate for the complexity of what he was feeling. 3 days wasn't long enough to know if what existed between them was real or just the intensity of shared survival, but it was long enough to know he wasn't ready to find out what his life looked like without her in it. Rivera was watching this exchange with the calculating expression of someone who'd seen too many operations go sideways because of personal complications. "Marcus, you understand the risks you'd be taking on. Kozlov's organization may be crippled, but there are still loose ends. Elena would be a target for years, maybe decades." "I've been a target before," Marcus replied. "The difference is, this time, I get to choose my battlefield." The helicopter banked left, following the curve of a mountain range that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Below, Marcus could make out the familiar landmarks of home, the lake where he'd taught himself to find peace again, the clearing where he'd first trained Kodiak and Bear, the cabin where he'd spent 2 years learning to sleep without nightmares. "What about your work?" Elena asked. "The search and rescue, the training programs? I can't ask you to give up your life for me." "You're not asking. I'm choosing." He squeezed her hand. "Besides, I'm thinking there might be room to expand the operation. Trauma recovery, long-term rehabilitation. There's a lot of people out there who need what we've built, and most of them won't be found by traditional services." For the first time since he'd known her, Elena smiled without reservation. Not the careful, guarded expression she'd worn like armor, but something genuine and unrestrained. "You're talking about helping people like me. I'm talking about helping people like us." Rivera closed her laptop with a sharp snap. "If you're serious about this, there are protocols to follow. Security assessments, communication procedures, emergency extraction plans. The Bureau can't officially endorse this arrangement, but we can make sure it's done right." Marcus nodded, understanding the subtext. They'd have oversight, structure, accountability. In return, they'd have backup when they needed it. The pilot's voice crackled through the headset, landing in 5 minutes. Elena leaned back in her seat, her eyes closing as exhaustion finally claimed her. But her hand remained in Marcus's, steady and warm. Outside, the Alaskan wilderness spread beneath them like a promise, vast enough to hide in, wild enough to heal in, and home enough to build something new from the ashes of what had been lost.